Welcome to part 2 of this ball tube slide satisfying looping animation created with Blender. So this is the second part of the tutorial, so if you haven't seen part 1 where we modeled the base of the scene, then definitely check that out with the link in the description. So in this part we're going to be animating the balls using the rigid body physics, and then we'll be rendering out the frames and creating the looping animation. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the finished project files, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I'll have the links in the description. Now just one more thing before we start with this part, I want to let you know about my sci-fi construction robot Blender course. So that is an 11-part tutorial series, and I show you step by step in real time how to create this sci-fi construction robot, and we even rig and animate the construction robot. If you'd like to learn more about the course, then you can check out the product trailer video with the link in the description, and you can check out the product pages to learn more about the course with the links in the description. Alright, so I'll hold down the Z button and I'll move my mouse back over to the solid view, and we're going to create the balls, and then we'll be adding the rigid body physics to the balls. So I'll go to the add menu and let's go here to mesh, and I'm going to add an icosphere, and then right after I add the icosphere, before I move away or click away from the icosphere, I'm going to click here behind me on the little add icosphere settings. And I'm going to turn these subdivisions up to 3 so that it is more smooth. Now you could turn the subdivisions up higher if you want, but if you turn them up too high, then there's going to be lots of geometry and that will actually slow down the rigid body physics. So I'm going to leave the subdivisions at 3, and then I'll close the add icosphere settings, and I'll use the object context menu and shade the object smooth. Then I'll hit G to grab, and I'll move the sphere right up here and just stick it on top of the first pipe there. Then I'll bring it down, and I'll hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and I want to scale it down maybe about half the size or even a bit smaller, so something like that. So scale it down in edit mode and then go back to object mode, and then I'll just bring it right over here and kind of stick it right in there so it's just above that pipe there. Then let's create a material for the object, so I'll click on the object here, I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view. Let's click on new to add a new material here, and on the name here I can just call it balls, and then here on the base color I'm going to make this kind of like a dark blue color, so something like that. And then here on the roughness, I'm going to turn this down to like a 0.35, so it kind of looks like a rubber ball, and maybe make the blue color a little bit deeper. Alright, so something like that. I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse back to the solid view. And I think if I go into edit mode again, I just want to make the sphere a little bit smaller. Okay, that's pretty good. So now let's add the rigid body physics. So I'm going to select the sphere here, and then let's click right over here to go to the physics panel. And just on the sphere, I want to add the rigid body. So now if you hit the space bar to play, or by clicking the play button right here, you can see the sphere is going to fall. And then to move the timeline back, you can click on this button here to jump to the starting and to the ending. You can also click here where the numbers are, and you can drag it around back to the starting, and then the space bar to play. So you can see it's just falling through the other objects, and so that's because we need to add physics to this object here. So we're going to select the tube object here, and let's click on rigid body. Now if I press the spacebar to play this, you can see they both fall. So to make this object stay where it is but interact with the other objects, we want to change the type here from active to passive. So this way it still has the rigid body, but it's not going to move, but it will still interact with the other objects. So now if I press the spacebar to play, you can see that the ball just stops here on the top of the tube. And that is because of the collision shape. So right now the default is convex hull, and this will simulate a bit faster, but it's not going to include all the details of the object shape. So to include the details, we want to click here on convex hull, and we're going to change it to mesh. This way, if I press the spacebar to play, you can see now it's actually interacting with the actual shape of the tube. And so if I go into the wireframe view and play this, you can actually see the sphere going through. I'll just select the sphere so I can see it. So now it's going through these other objects. So I want to select this object here, and let's again choose the rigid body, and then again the active, we need to change the passive. So now if I play this, you can see now it interacts with that object, and then let's select this object here, and we're going to click on rigid body and again change the active to passive. Now we're going to be rotating this object and animating it. So we want to check mark this animated button. And so this way, with the animated checked, it's still going to use the rigid body physics, but it will include the animation. So that way this object can rotate around on the Z-axis, and it's going to actually push the sphere around. So we can go back to the starting and play this again. And there's another problem that's happening, and you can see that when the sphere gets to about here, it stops. And that is again because these objects here, we need to use the mesh shape, so it's using the more detailed rigid body. So select this object here. We want to change the shape to mesh, so it'll actually use all the details of the shapes. Click on this object here, click on the shape, and we're also going to change this to mesh. So now if I go back to the starting and play this again, you can see the sphere falls out there, and then it actually hits on top of this object and falls down. So it's interacting correctly. And then again, one more object, we're going to click on this object here. We're going to choose rigid body. And again, we want to change the active to the passive so it doesn't move. And then the shape here, we want to change it to the mesh instead of the convex hull. So now I want to change the start frame and the end frame. So right up here, here's the timeline, and I'm going to have this be a 500 frame animation. You could make it longer or shorter if you want to. I'm going to have the end frame be 500. Now also, to make sure that the rigid body is going to animate through the 500 frames, we want to click right here to go to the scene properties, and we're going to open up the rigid body world. Now here on the cache, we want to open this up, and we want to make the end here be 501. Now why I'm doing 501 is because we're going to be adding keyframes to frame 501, and that way it'll be a perfectly seamless looping animation. I'll explain that a little bit later in a moment when we do the animation, but for now just set the end frame to 501. And you can bake the simulation, but I'm just going to press the spacebar for now and just have it kind of do the bake when you play it. But then before we actually render the animation, we are going to bake it. Just make sure it fully bakes everything and there's no glitches or issues when we actually animate it. So we will bake this later, but not right now. So for now, I'll just click back over here to go to the physics properties. So I'm going to now be animating this spinning object. So I'll select the spinning object, and then I'm going to go here to frame 1. So you can use the arrow keys to move to frame 1. So make sure you are on frame 1 and make sure this object is selected, and I'll hit the I key to bring up the keyframe menu, and we're going to choose rotation. So now what I'm going to do is click on the current frame here, and I'm going to type in 501. So now you can see the playhead is at 501, and I want to add another keyframe. Now we're going to be doing this at frame 501 so that it's a perfectly seamless looping animation. Now if we were to have the last keyframe at 500, then frame 500 and frame 1 would be the exact same location, and so there would be one keyframe or two keyframes where it's at the exact same point, and so it wouldn't look like a perfectly seamless looping animation. But if we put the playhead at 501, then the animation will loop at frame 501, but the end frame is at 500, so before it gets to 501, it'll go back to frame 1. Now for this looping animation, which is 500 frames long, I've found that rotating this object around 4 times looks pretty good. I think that's a pretty good speed. So to make it rotate exactly 4 times around, we can bring up a calculator, and 360 degrees is all the way around once. So if we times 360 by 4, that is going to equal 1440. So again, move the playhead to 501 or 1 frame after the end frame. We're going to hit R to rotate, then we'll hit Z to rotate it on the Z axis, and I'll type in 1440 and enter. And to make sure that it's 1440, you can look right up there on the corner. You can see up there in the corner of Blender, it'll say 1440. And actually after I type 1440, I'm going to hit negative so it rotates negatively instead of positively. So again, R to rotate. We'll rotate it on the Z axis. I'll type negative 1440 and then enter. And then again, hit the I key to insert a keyframe, and we're going to insert rotation. So now if I press the spacebar to play this, you can see it's rotating negatively instead of positively, and it's going to rotate all the way around 4 times. So you can see now it's starting to speed up and then it's slowing down at the end. So it is a looping animation, but I want it to play at a consistent speed. So you can press the A key with your mouse in the timeline to select the keyframes. You can then hit the T key, which is going to bring up this set keyframe interpolation, and I'm going to use linear. This way, when I play the animation, you can see the object is moving at a consistent speed, and you can see when it gets to the end, it jumps back to the starting, and it's a perfectly seamless animation. So now that this part is animated, you can see it's actually pushing the ball into the tunnel, and then you can see it falls down. So now what we need to do is just add all the balls, and then we'll have the balls fall at different times within the animation. So we'll go back to the starting, and this ball here, we're just going to have it fall at the very starting. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate and bring it up on the Z axis, and just just stick it here right above this one. Now to actually change the timing of when the ball falls, we can use this animated button. So this is over here on the physics, so make sure you have this ball selected. We're going to check mark the animated, and then we can just play it as long as we want. Maybe let's go to around frame 30 or something like that. And what we're going to do is add keyframes to the animated value. So hover your mouse over the animated value and we'll press the I key to add a keyframe, so we're telling it that it's going to be turned on. Then we'll hit the arrow key to go forward 1 frame, so for me it's now frame 31. We're going to click on the button to turn it off. And then we'll hit the I key again to add another keyframe. So we're basically saying that over here it's going to be turned on, so it's going to be animated, so it's not going to move. Then after this, it's going to be turned off, and so then it will actually start to simulate. So you can see right after here, right at frame 31, then it starts to fall. And so that's really easy. We're just going to do that for all the spheres. And we can actually just duplicate the spheres, and then we can just move the timing of the keyframes around. So this is super optional of where you want to place it. You can really just place it wherever you want. You can place it exactly where I'm placing them and add as many as you want, or just do whatever you want. So I'm going to select this top one again. I'll press Shift D to duplicate, bring it up on the Z-axis, and then press the A key to make sure the keyframes are selected. And you can hit G to grab and just drag them over and just put them where you want. All right. And then press the space bar to play. And you can see that now they're going to be offset. So now this one doesn't fall until around 60. So now that falls down, and that's pretty cool that there's 2 of them now kind of being pushed through the little tunnel. So I'm just going to keep on doing this, and I believe I'm going to make about 8 of them. I think 8 of them is a pretty good amount. And then to make it be a looping seamless animation, we're just going to make sure that at the very end you can't see any of the spheres, so by the end of the animation they should all be out of the frame, and then that way it'll be a perfectly looping animation. So I'll press Shift D to duplicate, bring this up on the Z-axis, hit G to grab and move the keyframes over, and you can just bring the keyframes over wherever you want. So I might have like a little bit of a bigger gap here, so maybe stick that one right there. All right, so there goes the next one. Go back to the starting, Shift D to duplicate, bring it up on the Z-axis, and then hit G to grab and move the keyframes over, and we'll put another one here. And you can see right down here there's that little orange line. That orange line is it baking, so if you like drag it over here and then play it, you can see it's not going to bake correctly. So you need to go to the starting and then press the space bar to play, and you need to let it bake through. You can see there's that little orange line there, kind of like a dark orange line, and it's kind of baking it so we can actually see what's happening. All right, so then that's going to fall there. All right, that's good. And I think I actually want it to fall a bit further or a bit sooner. So I'll hit G to grab and bring this one back a bit. Then I can go back to the starting and play this. So you can just get the timing how you want. You can have lots of spheres. You can have very few of them. Just make it exactly how you want. All right, so there's the next one, and I'll just do a few more. So I'll go back to the starting, Shift D to duplicate, bring it up on the Z-axis, move another one over there. All right, and then those 2 fall in, and it looks like we still have enough room for maybe 1 or 2 more of them. So I'm going to go back to the starting, duplicate this, bring it up on the Z-axis, and bring this maybe to around 300. All right, we'll just play through that, see how that is looking. And then when I was prepping the tutorial and making this a few times and making sure I knew how to make it in the video, sometimes it would happen where these spheres wouldn't actually go through because this spinning part would spin too fast, and so they'd kind of get pushed up. And so if that's happening, there's a few things you can do to fix that. One thing you can do is make the balls smaller. So if they're too big, they may not fit through here, and this spinning part may spin them too fast. Another thing you can do is you can go into edit mode of these objects and you can make the circles bigger. For me, this is working great. They're all going through just fine. But if it's moving too fast or they're not going through, then you can just make that bigger or make the balls smaller. Either way will work great. And you can see right down there at the very end, you want to make sure that all the spheres are out of the scene by the time it gets to frame 500. Because if there's still a sphere here and it jumps back to frame 1, the sphere will suddenly disappear and then it won't look like it's a looping animation. All right, so something like that is pretty good. So now what I can do is bake the animation to actually finalize it. And I do want to make sure I bake the animation so that when I close the Blender file or when I'm rendering it, it doesn't actually get rid of the bake, because sometimes when you're actually rendering the 3D scene, it may like forget the bake, because this bake here, when you're playing it, this is kind of like a temporary bake. And so it is possible it might lose the bake data. So what we're going to do is click here to go to the scene properties, and here in the rigid body world, we're going to use this cache bake here, and this will like hard bake it, and so it won't lose the data. So we'll click bake here, and you can see it's going to go through, and you can see it went through really fast because it had already baked it. And now because we've actually baked it, I can scrub through the timeline and it won't get rid of that bake. So I can just play through it and make sure everything looks good. Let's hold down the Z button, and I'm going to move my mouse up into the rendered view, and I'm just going to make sure that that sphere there just goes out of frame. You can see that is almost perfect, so it just goes out of the frame. Then there's just a few frames here at the very end where there's no spheres, then it jumps back to the starting and the next sphere comes down. So that way it'll make it a really nice looping animation. So now let's just do a few more things to set up the scene and get this ready for rendering. So one thing that I want to do is add a small depth of field. So I'll go to the add menu and I want to add an object that the camera can focus on. So let's just choose an empty plane axis, and I'm adding this empty object because the empty object won't show up in the render. So I'm just going to stick the empty right down here and kind of scale it down and just stick it about here. So this is what the camera can focus on. And then we can select the camera. We can click here on the object data properties of the camera, and let's choose the depth of field. And then on the eyedropper here, we can click on the eyedropper and choose the empty object, or you can click on the object, drop down here and choose the empty object. If I go into the camera view with the 0 on the numpad, hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view, you can now change the f-stop here. So let me just drag this up so you can see it better. So I can drag the f-stop. If the f-stop is really small, you can see things are a bit blurred. So I want to turn it up a bit. I just want to add like a small depth of field. So maybe I'll just turn this up to like a 3. That's actually a bit too big. I do want kind of these objects which are farther away to be a bit more blurred. So maybe turn the f-stop value to a 2. That's pretty good, but I do want all of these objects here to generally be in focus, so maybe a value of 2 will be pretty good. Now, to make this render faster, if you're using the Cycles rendering engine, we can turn down the light paths to make it render faster. So let's go over here on the render properties, and let's open up the sampling. And for my scene, I found that 100 samples works pretty good. And then also we can open up the light paths here. And if we turn the light paths down, then it will render faster. So I'm going to turn off the reflective and refractive caustics, turn those off. The filter glossy, will turn that off. The indirect light, will turn that all off to 0. And also on the max bounces here, all of these values, so the total, the diffuse, the glossy, and the transmission, we can turn all these way down to a 2. And then this transparent, if we turn this down too low, you can see it won't use the transparency. So I'm going to turn the transparency up just to like a 4. So you can see by turning up to a 4, it's fully using the transparency. But if you like turn it down to a 3, you can see it's starting to look really dark and weird. And of course, you could use Blender Eevee if you wanted to, if Cycles is taking way too long to render. I know that not everyone has the most powerful computer, so it might take a long time to render. Now, if you are using the Eevee rendering engine, I'll just show you real quick. You can see that the Eevee rendering engine isn't actually showing through the glass. So real quick, I'll just show you how to fix that if you are using Eevee. So for the Eevee users, let's click here on the render properties and let's close some of these settings. And I'm going to turn on the ambient occlusion and the screen space reflections and the motion blur just to make Eevee look a bit nicer. And then on the screen space reflections here, let's also check mark the fraction button. Now, we need to click on the object here, which has the glass. We also need to click here on the material properties. And we need to change the blend mode. I'm going to choose the alpha hash because I think the alpha hash works better. And then the shadow mode, also choose the alpha hashed. Now, if you zoom into the glass, you can see there is a little bit of graininess. So one thing you could do on the blend mode here is choose alpha blend instead, and that looks a bit nicer. And then just one more thing, this factor value is going to change between using more glass or more transparent. So you could turn the factor way down to a small number, and that way you can see through the glass a little bit better. But if you turn it down too far, it's going to be like super transparent and it doesn't look realistic. So you could play around with that and get it to how you want. However, I'm going to use the Cycles rendering engine, so I'll keep it at 0.32. Let's go right back up here to the render properties, and we'll change Eevee back to Cycles. All right, now I'm just going to render out one frame. So let's press Ctrl S to save this, and then I'll hit F12, or you can click on render and render image. And you can see it has rendered, and for my computer that took 14 seconds. Now if I zoom in here, I can see that there's a lot of grain. So one way to fix this is here in the render, you can actually turn on this denoise, and this will denoise the image so that after it renders, it denoises it. So you could use that denoise if you want to. However, I'm going to use the denoise in the compositor just because I really like that. I think it does a good job, and it does denoise the image quite fast. So I'm going to click here on the compositing, and then let's click on use nodes. Then what I'll do is go to the add menu, and I can search for the denoise node, and I'll put the denoise node here between the render layers and composite. And then let's change the accurate to fast instead. So now if I again press F12 to render, you can see once it's done, it composites the image and you can see it denoises it. So now if I just kind of look around there, I can see that looks quite a bit nicer. Now you can see there's just a little bit of smudging there. And so to fix that smudging, for my scene, I'm just going to change the samples up to like 200 because my computer is pretty fast. So I'm just going to render this scene with a bit higher samples. Of course, you'll have to change that depending on the speed if it's taking too long to render. Now we need to render out all the frames to images, and then we'll compile them together in Blender's video editor. So let's click here on the output properties, and I'll scroll down here. Now on the output, on the file format, you could use PNG or JPEG. I'm going to choose JPEG. So right here on the output, let's choose JPEG. And I'm just using JPEG because it'll make the file size a bit smaller, but then I'll turn the quality to 100. Now we also need to save all the images into a folder. So I'm going to click on this file icon right here. And then in my project files, I will click on the plus here to make a new folder. I can just rename the folder to frames. I will go inside the folder, and then I will click on the accept button. So now it'll render out all of those frames to images in that folder. So I'll press Ctrl S to save this again, and then I will click on render, and I will click on render animation, and I'll come back when all the frames have rendered. Alright, so once the frames are finished rendering, you can just open up a completely new Blender file, or using the existing file, you can just click here on File, and we're going to open up Blender's video editor, so we'll go to New, and we'll just click here on Video Editing. So now here in Blender's video editor, here in the sequencer, I'll press Shift A for the Add menu, and let's go down here to Image and Sequence. And then you're just going to locate to the folder where you've saved all the frames, and you can press the A key to make sure all the frames are selected. Now also right up here on the drop down, you want to make sure that it's sort by name, and that way it'll start as 1 and then go down and it will go in the correct order. So let's click on Add Image Strip. So here's the image strip, and you can press the space bar to play the animation or click on the play button right here. Now I want to make this be the same frame rate and resolution as the video that I rendered it from the other Blender file. So here on the frame rate, I did render it at 24 frames per second, so I'll just leave that how it is. That was the default. However, I do need to change the resolution. So what you can do is just select the strip right here, and then you can click on strip, and then you can click on set render size, and that'll set the correct render size. So I can now play through this and watch the animation. Let's turn the end frame up really high. So you could turn up really high or as large as you want. I'm just going to turn it to 1000, so that way the animation will loop twice. And then let's also hold down the control key, and I'll click with my middle mouse wheel to make that larger and bring it up here. And then what I can do to make it loop is I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and I can drag and drop the other frames right here. And now if I go back here to the end, you can see if I zoom in, you can see it is a perfectly seamless looping animation. So now we can add in the sound effects to really make it more satisfying and to make it feel more real. So I will have the links in the description to the free sound effects that I'll be downloading from freesound.org if you want to use the same sound effects. So I'm first going to drag in this fan industrial old sound effect. I'll just drag this in here from my file browser. Let's click on the display waveform so that we can see the waveform, and I'll just bring it over here, and then I can just press the space bar to play that. And so this is a really good sound effect for that rotating piece. It kind of sounds like maybe there's some gears or some other machinery which is rotating that piece there. So this sound effect here, I just want it to kind of be out of the way. So I'll press the A key to select all of the strips here. I'll hit G to grab, and then I can move the strips up. So click Y to bring them up on the Y axis and click there. And then I can click on this one here, hit G to grab, and just move it down here underneath the video strips. So now it's just kind of out of the way. And so this way we can add the tennis ball sound effects on the top here. Alright, so now I want to add all the tennis ball sound effects, and I'm just going to add them for this first one here, and then we will duplicate them so that we don't have to add the tennis ball sound effects to every single loop. So I'm going to drag in the tennis ball sound effect here, and I'll click on display waveform, and I'm also going to turn the volume to 2 so that it is louder, and you won't be able to hear the tennis ball sound effect in the video just because I've disabled the computer audio with my screen recording software, but you can clearly see it right here. So what you can do is just drag this timeline right here, and then what you can do is press the K button to cut the strips. Now you'll see here on the screencast keys, it says the S key. That's because I've customized my shortcut keys, but for you, the default shortcut key in Blender is the K button to cut the strips. So I'm going to go along here and just press the K button, and I'm going to cut out all the tennis ball drops. And then if you play this, you can hear these ones here, they're really small and you can't hear them that well. So I can just delete them. So I'll press the K button again to cut the strip. And then you can select this strip here and press X to delete. And also this here, X to delete and X to delete. And so we're just going to go through here and we're just going to cut out just the tennis balls, which are going to fall. So the little sound effects there. So we'll cut this one here, select this one, cut this one here, and just keep on going here and cut all of the little tennis ball sound effects. And then all these other ones here. And then this one's really quiet, so I'm going to delete that. I can also select the handles on the end and move them in. All right, go back here, delete these extra spots here that we don't need. All right, so then I can click and drag or hit B for the box select and click and drag to box select all of those sound effects. And I can hit G to grab, and I can just move the sound effects over. So I now just need to align all of the sound effects with the balls dropping. And it's really important that you get the timing right, because if you don't get the timing right, it just really won't look realistic. So I'm just going to scrub the timeline here until the blue ball just touches that wood piece, and I'll hit G to grab, and I'm going to move this first sound effect right there. So now when I play through that, it just sounds like the ball is hitting the wood piece. So we will just deselect everything, just box select these ones and kind of move them back, box select these ones and move them back. So I'll press the space bar again to play, and you can see the second ball falls right here. So I'll drag this over here and just make sure that timing is correct. And you can see the next ball drops about there. So I'll put another one there. And you're just going to continue to do this all the way through this one loop. So it's pretty easy to do. It does take a little bit of time, but it's not that hard. And so this one here, you can see it kind of falls on that metal piece and then it falls down. So I think what I'll do is move the sound effect up here. So there's kind of two of them. So it kind of falls and then it also hits the wood piece right there. So that's pretty good. Just doing those little things, but it'll really make it look more realistic, because there's actually going to be sound with the video. All right, so now that I've gone through it once and I've added all the balls dropping, I also want to add another little sound effect of the tennis balls when they kind of hit this plastic pipe here, or the glass pipe. So I'm going to go back to the starting, and I can just play this, and I can just listen to when the balls hit the pipe. So I'm going to have a sound effect kind of right here when the ball hits the pipe there. All right, so that's good. Just makes it look a bit more realistic. And then there's going to be like two of them here because there's kind of two of them falling. Now, if you run out of sound effects, you can just click on some other ones and press Shift D to duplicate it and just make a few more and just kind of randomly duplicate them if you ran out of the tennis ball sound effects. So now I'll go through the timeline until this one falls, and I'll just select a random one, Shift D to duplicate it and stick it about here. All right, so now that we have all these sound effects, I want to make this a looping animation, and I don't want to have to duplicate them and try to get them to the exact location. So I'll select this one here that we duplicated, and I'll press X to delete. And then I can press B for the box select and just box select all of the sound effects and also the actual animation. And then I'll press Control G. So Control G will join them together into a meta strip. If you hit the tab key with the meta strip selected, you can go in and out of the meta strip. So it's basically like a group of strips. So now that that has been grouped together, the sound effects and the video are one strip. So I can now just press Shift D to duplicate and drop it here, and Shift D to duplicate, drop it here, and you can really just add as many as you want. For this shot here, I'm just going to render it with 1,000 frames, so that's just going to be 2 loops, but you can of course make it as long as you want, and you can add more of this industrial fan sound effect and make it as long as you want. All right, so that's what I'm going to do for the looping animation. So let's render this out to a video. So here on the format, let's go down here, and on the output, we want to click on this file icon to set an output. And I'll just save this in the folder with my other project files and click on accept. And then here on the file format, I'll use the FFmpeg video. For the encoding here, I'll use H.264 as the codec. I'll just use medium quality and good. And then for the audio codec here, I'll use AAC. So you can save this video editing file. So I'll click on File and Save. And I'll just save this as videoediting.blend, save that file, press Ctrl S, and then to render the animation, you can click on Render and render the animation, or press Ctrl F12. And that is how you create the ball tube slide satisfying looping animation in Blender. So I hope you were easily able to follow along with the tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel to help me keep on creating these free tutorials, then definitely check out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, you can get lots of Blender content like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and lots more Blender content. And you can also purchase the finished project files of this tutorial. The links to that will be in the description. And to watch more looping animation tutorials, definitely check out my Blender looping animations tutorial playlist here on YouTube. Links will be in the description. But I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.